Sunday. Thanks for coming back. This is Tammy, and this is part number 7 in my little mini-series on KNITLIT. Today I'm featuring Maggie Sefton. Knit 1, Kill 2 is the first book of A Knitter's Mystery, which is the name of the series. These books are the story is based in Colorado, which Maggie Sefton, which is a synonym for Margaret Conlon, lives there part-time of the year in Colorado, so she obviously, when you read these books, you'll see she loves that area, she loves the livestock, the fiber, the people. I think you're really going to enjoy this series. I know I featured a knitting mystery series a couple episodes back that was set at the seaside. Hopefully you'll like this one because it's set at the mountains. So let's get started. Chapter 1. Kelly Flynn nosed her car onto the gravel driveway and pulled to a stop in front of the familiar little house perched beside the golf course. Everything looked the same. Aunt Helen's beige stucco, red tile-roofed cottage looked as cozy and inviting as always. Golfers were scattered about the lush greens, doggedly working to improve their games. In the background, the Colorado Rocky Mountains, still snow-capped in the late spring, loomed over the entire scene. It was all picture postcard pretty, just like Kelly remembered, except for one thing. Aunt Helen was dead, murdered a week ago, in her picturesque cottage. A burglary gone bad, the police called it. Kelly's gut still twisted at the thought. Aunt Helen would have fought back. Kelly knew she would. Even though she was thin as a stick and a foot shorter than Kelly, she was wiry and tough, and she had spirit, spunk. She would never go down without a fight. Not Aunt Helen. No way. Kelly felt tears rise to her eyes again as she remembered her aunt's favorite admonition. Never give up, Kelly girl. If you want something bad enough, don't you ever give up. The tears escaped, running down Kelly's cheeks as she swiped them away with the back of her hand. She'd never even had the chance to say goodbye. At least with her dad, Kelly'd been able to tell him how much she loved him. Cancer may be an ugly way to die, but it was slower. Murder was a thief in the night, creeping in to steal away valuable loved ones, and this thief stole the only mother Kelly had ever known. A cold, wet nose shoved against Kelly's neck, and she turned to pat the shiny black Rottweiler head resting beside her shoulder. Carl always sensed her moods. Don't worry, boy. I haven't forgotten you. You're looking at that grass, right? She pointed to the manicured golf course stretching from her aunt's property all the way to the river that meandered diagonally through the scenic college town north of Denver. Kelly let herself gaze. It had been 6 months since she'd returned to Fort Connor, where she'd spent her early childhood. Every time she returned, she wondered how she'd ever make herself leave again. The sky was bluer here, the air was cleaner, the sun was brighter, by a mile high to be exact, as Aunt Helen used to say. What a gorgeous day. If her aunt was still alive, she and Kelly would take one of their favorite hikes along a trail in the nearby Padre Canyon. How could it be so beautiful with Helen gone? Carl whined to get her attention, clearly eager to explore. Okay, boy, but you can't run on the course. The groundskeeper wouldn't appreciate your lifting a leg on every tee. Carl rolled his soft brown eyes to her in pleading mode. Nope, you're just going to have to make do with the yard. Kelly opened the car door and slid out, grabbing a leash as she did. Carl's ears perked up at the magic jingle, and he gave an excited yelp. That meant outside and play. Snapping the leash to his red collar, Kelly headed to the small backyard. Tall cottonwood trees surrounded the property, shading house and yard. Flower boxes were already planted, even though Kelly knew the frost date in northern Colorado was a yearly gamble. Somehow, Helen always won out. Her green thumb or gardener's luck would overcome even Colorado's capricious weather. Kelly made a mental note to water the plants that evening. She wasn't about to let Helen's plants die with her. She swung the back gate open and ushered Carl inside. "It isn't the golf course, boy, but it's bigger than your yard for sure," she said, referring to her postage stamp-sized townhouse yard on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. Carl didn't waste time. He took off the moment his leash was unsnapped, nose to the ground. The sound of another car coming down the gravel driveway caught Kelly's attention, and she turned to see a red minivan drive up to the larger stucco and red-tiled roofed house across the drive. A woman exited the van and entering the sprawling mirror image of Helen's cottage. Both houses and the assorted outbuildings nearby occupied the pie-shaped wedge of land that clung to the corner of the busy intersection. Kelly remembered when both streets were country roads, cutting through fields of sugar beets and sheep farms. Now, a big box discount store swallowed the opposite corner, and townhouses clustered across the street. At least her aunt and uncle had sold their farmland to the city for a golf course, and kept only the cottage and its yard. If she squinted her eyes hard enough, Kelly could block out the golfers and picture her uncle heading to the barn years ago when he was still alive. "Kelly, is that you?" a woman's voice called. Kelly shut the gate, knowing Carl would be occupied for hours identifying scents. She turned and recognized Mimi Schaefer walking across the driveway. Mimi owned the knitting and needlework shop that now occupied what was once Aunt Helen's and Uncle Jim's farmhouse. Her aunt had been ecstatic about the arrangement since she was a knitter, an expert knitter and quilter, but Kelly always felt vaguely resentful. She remembered when the house was filled with Aunt Helen and Uncle Jim and memories, but Uncle Jim's long illness changed all of that. Now Kelly felt nothing but gratitude. Mimi had been Helen's closest friend, and had never left Kelly's side during yesterday's service. She gave names to faces, and helped Kelly stand and sit through the liturgy that was no longer familiar. Kelly straightened her white blouse and navy skirt. Not as tailored as her usual CPA firm attire, but sober enough for a lawyer meeting. She couldn't wait until she could change into a casual top and slacks, maybe even shorts if it stayed warm. Ever since she got back, she'd been dressed up and meeting people, just like the office, but Colorado meant sunshine and mountains and freedom to Kelly, and that meant shorts, a t-shirt, and sneakers. She brushed her chin-length dark brown hair behind her ear and checked the barrette and back. Kelly rushed her through her shower and dressing in order to fit in a morning run along the trail that ran beside the motel. She barely checked the mirror. After yesterday's tears, she needed to clear her head. Running always helped her think. She waved to Mimi. "I just thought I'd let Carl use Helen's backyard today while I go to all those, meetings, lawyer, banker, and all of that." "That's a great idea. I'm sure he's tired of being cooped up in the motel room," Mimi said with a bright smile. Her sun-streaked brown hair feathered softly around her face. 50-ish, slender and pretty, she wore a powder blue straight dress that accentuated her trim figure. But what really drew Kelly's attention was the open weave vest she wore on top. The loosely fixed knots held the yarns together. Varying shades of blue traveled all the way to green and back again. The effect was stunning. "Do you have time for a cup of tea or coffee?" Mimi asked, obviously hoping for a yes. Kelly hesitated, running through her mental day timer. That and the Greenwich Meridian time clock in her head kept Kelly on task. She depended on that clock. Back in the firm, everyone kept track of their time in tenths of an hour, 6-minute intervals, billable hours. Consequently, Kelly was seldom late. "I have a few minutes. My appointment with the lawyer isn't until 10. "Oh, darn, I was hoping we'd have more time," Mimi said, with her smile momentarily missing. "I'd been dying to show you the shop, but I guess it'll just have to wait till later today. Why don't you step over to the cafe?" She gestured toward the pathway leading around the farmhouse. Kelly completely forgot that a bistro-styled cafe had opened up in the former kitchen and dining room of the farmhouse since her last visit. As they followed the flower beds and flagstone path, Kelly was astonished to see the cafe also spilled out into a shady backyard. Surrounded by the high stucco walls, the entire patio was private, secluded from the outside. The whole setting was delightful and charming, Kelly had to admit. Mimi chose the table and sat down, motioning to a nearby waitress as Kelly settled into a wrought iron chair. "This is really quite nice. I like what they've done here," Kelly surprised herself by saying. Noticing the many tables filled with customers lingering over late breakfasts and brunch, she asked, "How's it going? Financially, I mean. I know it's hard for small restaurants to make it. As a beginning accountant years ago, Kelly had had several restaurants to worry about. Shoebox clients, she used to call them, because they always kept their accounts in shoeboxes for some reason. "Actually, quite well, according to Pete," said Mimi. "He's the young man who had the idea of turning this whole area into a restaurant. Somehow he managed to convince the management company that owns it to invest in used equipment, and he volunteered all the labor. He put his heart and soul into this place." She shook her head. "Let's hope all of that hard work hasn't been wasted for both of us." Intrigued by the cryptic remark, Kelly was about to respond when the waitress appeared. She had shoulder-length reddish-brown hair that curved round a pretty face. "Hi, Mimi," she said with a bright smile, and turned a warm gaze to Kelly. "Kelly, this is Jennifer Stroud," Mimi introduced. She was also a friend of Helen's. "Kelly, I just wanted to say how shocked we were at Helen's death. She was a wonderful lady. I used to see her at the shop almost every day, and she was always so loving and sweet. We all miss her a lot." The comments caught Kelly unprepared, and she felt her eyes glow suddenly moist. She glanced down at her napkin. "Thank you. You're very kind." Jennifer reached out and patted Kelly's arm. "Hey, that's okay. Let me bring you something. I know Mimi's order already. Earl Grey cream. How about you?" "Coffee, black and strong," Kelly said with a smile, which helped chase away the tears. "Down with decaf, right?" Jennifer winked as she flipped the notepad closed. "Be right back." "I think she was at the funeral yesterday, but I really can't remember too much," Kelly said as she watched Jennifer's skirt between the tables, glad for the chance to compose herself. "Oh, yes, she was there with the other knitting shop regulars." "Regulars? Who are they?" Kelly asked. "We've got a lot of knitting and needle shop groups that meet regularly at the shop during the week. Some are organized, some just happen, like Jennifer's group. They're a bunch of women, many of whom are around your age, who meet after work a couple times a week or more. Of course, everyone who shows up is welcome to sit in with any group. That's how Helen met Jennifer and the others." Kelly could easily picture that. Helen was always knitting and loved nothing better than to share her passion. It was a shame Kelly had proven to be such an unwilling student. Now she was sorry she'd feigned impatience whenever her aunt tried to coax her into learning to knit. "I know Aunt Helen enjoyed that," Kelly mused. "She loved meeting new people, and living across from the shop she could make new friends almost every day. Every week I'd call her and she'd tell me something funny she'd heard, usually from some friend. Kelly would miss those phone calls. Helen had lots of friends, as you saw yesterday at the service. Everyone loved her, and we want to help you in whatever way we can, Kelly. Several people have offered to help go through the house when you're ready." Kelly groaned inwardly. That unpleasant chore had almost slipped her mind. Whenever it appeared, she shoved it away. At least having people with her would make the task easier and less painful. "I confess I'm deliberately not thought about that chore," she admitted. "I guess I'm avoiding going into the house after, well, you know." "I understand, Kelly. Thanks so much. I really appreciate your help. I remember how hard it was going through my dad's things, and I'd been prepared for his death." Kelly reached out and patted Kelly's arm. Excuse me. Mimi reached out and patted Kelly's arm. "Well, you're not alone this time, Kelly. We're here to help you." Jennifer's cheerful bustle and the inviting tray of coffee and tea arrived, just as Kelly felt her eyes grow moist again. After the funeral yesterday, she thought she'd cried herself dry. Apparently there was a well inside of her that ran deeper than she knew. There was no one left anymore. Her dad, 3 years ago, now Aunt Helen. Her entire family was gone. "Here you go," Jennifer announced as she set the tea and coffee in place. "Pete even threw in one of those wicked cinnamon rolls on the house." "Oh, that's cruel," Mimi groaned. "He knows I can't have the sugar." Kelly eyed the tempting coil of golden, flaky sweet dough, slathered in sugary cream cheese icing that drizzled down the sides. She'd forgotten Fort Connor's community weakness for these oversized breakfast buns. The bakery that specialized in making them kept the calorie count a secret. It's still warm, tempted Jennifer with a grin. Her normal willpower was either sound asleep or stunned into silence at the sight of the huge pastry, so, with no nagging voice in her head, Kelly picked up the fork. What the heck? I'll need it for all those meetings. Lawyers are depressing. Absolutely, Jennifer concurred, clearly enjoying Kelly's quick capitulation. Besides, you're tall and slender. It'll never show. On me, it'd be on my hips in 5 minutes. Oh, right, Kelly retorted with a grin. Why don't you share it with me? Jennifer rolled her eyes. Don't tempt me. I was born with a sweet tooth. Seriously, I can't finish this monster all by myself. She sliced the bun in half and pushed one half to the side of her plate. Jennifer glanced at the pastry. We're not supposed to eat with the customers. Kelly sensed weakness. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and let out the dramatic, That's it. Priorities, Jennifer laughed and grabbed her portion. Which are, Mimi teased. Jennifer paused after swallowing. Right now, sugar. It's going to be a busy day. Kelly polished off her share and reached for the coffee, which was surprisingly rich and dark. She drank in the blissful enjoyment of the strong brew. Yum, this really is good for the plain stuff. My compliments. That's Eduardo's doing. He's our cook and insists on making the coffee every morning. I think he throws in espresso or chicory or shoelaces or who knows what, but it'll wake you up, that's for sure. Bless him and tell him I'll be back. The timer went off in her head. Kelly drained the cup. Speaking of that, I have to go. Lawyers get all pinched around the edges if you're late. She scooted back her chair and brushed telltale sugar flakes off her skirt. Oh, Mimi, I'd almost forgot. Could you fill a bowl with water for Carl, please? I fed him this morning, but I forgot to grab his water dish. No problem. I'll give him some food come dinner time, too, so don't rush. And make sure you stop in the shop when you return. I can't wait to show you everything we've done. You haven't been in since we opened 4 years ago. Mimi exuded pride. You'd be surprised, I think. I look forward to it. Thanks, Mimi, Kelly said as she backed away from the table. Glancing at Jennifer as she headed for the pathway, Kelly waved. Nice meeting you, Jennifer. Oh, you'll see me later at the shop with the others. Good luck with the lawyer. Kelly hastened to her car. She definitely let Mimi show off her shop, for Helen's sake, if nothing else. Kelly couldn't knit her way out of a paper bag, so all that knitting stuff would be lost on her. Her aunt had tried several times to instruct Kelly when she was growing up, and even as an adult, but it never seemed to take. Kelly would fumble the needles and drop the yarn, whatever it took to appear completely incompetent. There were so many more fun things to do outside on the farm, she just couldn't sit still long enough to learn. Besides, all those different kinds of stitches looked complicated to Kelly. Knitting here, purling there, all that yarn, needles busily working away, stitch after stitch, row after row. Looked like a lot of work to Kelly. She just didn't have that kind of patience. The only patience she'd ever had was for numbers. Numbers stayed put on paper. They didn't fall off the end of the needles. Oh yes, Kelly thought as she backed her car out of the parking space. The numbers were far less confusing than knitting. Lawrence Chambers tapped his gold-rimmed pen against the leather desk pad as he scanned the documents before him. Kelly used the opportunity to study the lawyer, who was the same age as her aunt. Her gray hair shone silver as a stray morning sunbeam crossed the desk. Chambers had been Aunt Helen's trusted lawyer and close friend for a lifetime. Thanks to Helen's foresight, you should have no problem handling any expense involved with the estate. You're a co-signer on both bank accounts, checking and savings, as well as safe deposit box. It was a smart move considering you're her only heir. Aunt Helen told me 4 years ago that what her wishes were. I've always tried to oblige her in whatever way I could. Chambers glanced up from the desk in his hand, papers in his hand, and smiled across the large walnut desk. Kelly noticed his faded blue eyes were kind. Helen appreciated everything you did for her. She told me so many times. Kelly glanced away. She was like a mom to me, Mr. Chambers. You know that. Besides, when my dad died 3 years ago, I promised him I'd take care of her. She was his only living relative. Guilt twinged inside. She'd never broken a promise to her dad in her whole life. Chambers set down the papers, watching Kelly, and then gestured to the wall. "That's hers, you know." Kelly studied the framed, quilted scene that caught her eye earlier. Deep, rich browns and greens portrayed a small house nestled in the mountains, surrounded by tall evergreens. "I thought that might be her work. It's so vibrant." "Yes, she did that from a photograph of the mountain cabin our family has had for years." He smiled. "She surprised us with it for our anniversary." That was Helen, always doing for others. If she wasn't stitching for someone she knew, she'd be knitting for the homeless shelter. "Yes, I know. I'm the one that used to buy yarn online to save her money." A spark of anger flared suddenly. "It doesn't seem right, does it, Mr. Chambers? My aunt was murdered by some vagrant, exactly the sort of person she tried to help. Where's the justice in that?" Chambers clasped his hands to the top of the documents. "There is none, Kelly. This is one of those horrible, awful acts of random violence." Kelly stared at the floor-to-ceiling walnut bookcase that lined one wall. "The officer told me that this was a burglary gone bad. She said this guy came into this to Helen's house that night, saw her purse and grabbed it, and then supposedly Helen came out and saw him, screamed and strangled her, and then he ran off." "Yes, that's exactly what the police told me. Apparently this man was a drunk and a vagrant who was always getting into trouble. He must have come into the house, grabbed her purse, and when Helen came out, his voice became strained. He killed her for it." He sighed. "Thank goodness he was too drunk to be smart. The police saw him run away from the scene, so they caught him right away." Kelly leaned forward in her chair and eyed Chambers. Something he said. "That's a little different from what the police told me. They said they'd seen a guy near the house, not coming from it. Are you sure that's what they told you?" Chambers pondered. "I'm fairly certain the detective who spoke with me said they captured the suspect fleeing the scene." "Yes, that's exactly what he said, fleeing the scene. And I took that to mean he was coming from the house. Do you remember who you spoke with, Mr. Chambers? The woman who called me was a community relations officer and wasn't involved with the case." "Oh, yes, I spoke with Lieutenant Morrison. He's in charge. A very experienced detective, from what I've heard. Very thorough." Kelly opened her portfolio and wrote the name on a legal pad. "I'm sure you're right, Mr. Chambers. I mean, this guy had to be lurking around Aunt Helen's house before he came in, looking in the windows or something." She closed the portfolio with a snap. "He must have been drunk. Why else would he have tried to steal from a woman who never carried more than $20 in her purse?" A bitter note crept into her voice. It felt good to release it. Chambers peered at Kelly over his glasses with a worried frown. "Well, she may have had more in her purse." "Oh, no, sir," Kelly countered. "She'd never had more than $20 in change at any time. She always used her debit card, because it kept her on a budget. And I should know, Mr. Chambers, because I drew up a budget and kept her accounts every month. She was still paying off some of Uncle Jim's medical bills, so she was very careful." Chambers' lined face became creased even more. "Didn't she tell you about the money she was borrowing?" Kelly blinked. Surely she hadn't heard the lawyer right. Borrowing? Helen wasn't borrowing any money. Remember, I kept her accounts. I would know. "I'm afraid she did, just before she died." Kelly stared back at him, incredulous. "What? Where? I mean, who? How much?" $20,000, Chambers said in a pained voice. $20,000? Kelly sat bolt upright. "But why? And where would Helen borrow that kind of money anyway? She was living on James' state pension and Social Security." "The only place she could, Kelly. She refinanced her house and went to one of those predatory lenders to do it." He shook his head sadly. "I advised her against it, but she wouldn't listen. She said she needed it and would talk to me later. I assumed she was giving it to you, that you needed it for something." "Me?" Kelly shot back. "I'd never ask Aunt Helen for money. I'd starve first." Chambers sat back in his leather armchair. Oh my," he said, clearly troubled. "I thought the money was for you. That's why I didn't worry too much when she said she needed it. After all, you're her only living relative." Kelly stared at the diplomas that lined the wall behind Chambers' desk. This was impossible. It made no sense. Her aunt couldn't even consider such a risky move without consulting Kelly. "This is crazy, Mr. Chambers. Aunt Helen was a sensible woman, you know that. She'd never do such a thing." "Why, we just financed her house 3 years ago to pay off most of Uncle Jim's medical bills. We've got a really low rate, perfect for her. I was going to help her pay off the mortgage so she'd have it free and clear in 10 years." Her hand shot out in frustration. She couldn't have done this stupid thing. And I'm going to end there. It's not a full chapter, but I want to be able to load this and so that you can see it easily. I'll talk to you soon. One more chapter to go, and that's a mystery too as to what it is. See you then.